This is Annie Farrar, and I'm the chairman for the Washington Sculptors Group, and I'm really excited that we're able to go forward with this program with Robin Moore on understanding artist estates, a very big topic. And so I want to say thank you so much for Robin for being flexible, and in light of recent coronavirus issues and our sort of state of affairs now, hopefully everyone's at home staying happy, healthy, and safe. But thank you, Robin, so much for your flexibility, and Judith Pratt, our vice chair, for working so hard to make this mobile program accessible, and was very happy to also receive that there are more people able to attend this way. So hopefully everyone who was going to come in person is able to come. Also, thank you to Zoe Laffis so much for hosting, with also a dedicated board member for hosting with the Center for Hellenic Studies, who's also running this program still. So I want to do a quick intro to Robin Moore. Robin has her master's in business administration and is an advisor to artists, and she has, which she'll go into more I think later, but an awesome background of being raised by two parents who both ran art businesses in the New York art scene, and also she managed her late husband's estate, the prominent DC artist Kevin McDonald. So she's been helping creative professionals work in this way. So without too much more, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Robin.
Hi, it's a little surreal here in beautiful campus of the Hellenic Studies Center. I wanted to share what I've learned in the past 14 years since my late husband died, and which has hooked into a lot of issues that I was raised with, and which my parents both dealt with, and which my mother is still dealing with, and which I've just seen repeated so many places in the world, and it makes perfect sense. Now the whole picture fits together with art history, with the way grief works, with the financial aspects, and I hope I can convey a little bit of that to you in this brief presentation, which will focus on your practical needs as an artist, starting to some degree with the questions that I received from WSG members through Judith Pratt several months ago. The presentation is called Understanding Estate Planning for Artists. My name is Robin Moore. As you heard, I was raised in the New York avant-garde scene of the 70s. Here is a picture that my father took. My father was a well-known photographer of Fluxus, Judson Dance, Happenings, and other experimental art movements. One of our good friends was the artist Nam June Paik, who many of you are now familiar with. At the time, a lot of these people were seen as nut jobs, and I don't know how much the adults around me knew that this stuff would make it into the art history books. My sister and I were pragmatic and playful, as all children were, and this is us taking a nap on Nam June Paik's work TV bed, and the reason I look so upset is that I really wanted to run up the staircase of Nam June Paik's work, nude descending a staircase, but my parents wouldn't let us. This one has the TVs protected with lucite. So it was playful, and the grown-ups were strange, and by the time I was in high school, I could see that these movements were making it into art history books. The artists were selling work at real commercial prices. But it changes the way you look at things when you participate in something that seems silly and personal, and it seems to then have larger application. Another piece of my father's work. This is artist Yoko Ono on a rooftop in Soho selling mornings. These are mornings for sale, and these ones are future mornings. I don't know how closely you can see the picture, but they're pieces of sea glass that she had collected. And I don't know how much they were, but I'm guessing it was probably $1 or so. So this was the vibe of the time and the ethos of the time. When I was in high school, I hung out with punk rockers, among whom, again, were some people who turned out to have a different destiny as history went on and things kept moving. This is a photo of Adam Yauch of the Beastie Boys that I took at one of their early shows. When I grew up, I married the artist Kevin McDonald, who many of you may know. He was the DC artist. We met in 1994 and we were together, well, 1992, and we were together until his death in 2006. This is just a silly picture of us at a Corcoran party dressed as dorks from outer space. And here to give you a better picture of something that actually matters is one of his works of art. We did a show at American University Museum in 2016. And this is one of the pieces that he's well known for. So to the actual material, why is artists' estate planning a specialized topic? Why are artists different? And why are artists' estates different? There are several pretty concrete reasons that artists' estates are difficult and different and idiosyncratic. For one thing, as most of you know, if you were to sell a large collection of pieces of your own artwork by a single artist, at one time you would get lower prices, then probably not even be able to sell them all, than if you were a collector and you had one work each for each of 20 artists. So the marketing is substantially different. And many of us also know how difficult it is to sell artwork at any given time. Artists' estates generally, even if they've been successful, they may contain hundreds of works of art, and they usually have less liquidity, meaning less cash on hand, to manage and take care of those resources. Artworks that involve materials, paintings, sculpture, and so on, and I recognize that not every artist works with materials, but artworks that are material require specialized care, specialized storage. They may require conservation from time to time. It's not simple. And again, it can get pretty expensive. You can't just sell a painting anytime you feel like it. It's not like selling stocks. If you want to sell a painting, you have to be very careful about who you can approach. The pricing has to be right. And there's all kinds of reputational issues involved if you sell work for other kinds of prices and in other kinds of situations. In addition, if you've been an artist who's sold work to a variety of other people and professionals, either corporate collections, institutional collections, or individual collectors, you have to maintain your high prices to some degree out of respect for their previous investments. And the other thing is that when you sell a work of art, you have to have some attention to the career context, to your role in history, to the type of collector, to the quality of the work. There's all kinds of things that can affect your the placement of your work that are pretty vital and sensitive, as opposed to, you know, if you had a Jackson Pollock or something. In addition to that, when artists try to get help for this, they're frequently misunderstood. The tax issues, the financial issues are frequently misunderstood, even by experts. You probably already know this if you've been working as an artist for a long time, that sometimes you end up educating your advisors on why you can't donate a work and get a $5,000 tax break, for example. I'm sure that's unfamiliar to most of you, but we can talk about it more in the Q&A if it's confusing. So the main vehicle that you need in order to be sure that your work is cared for after you pass is a will. A will is a legal document which must be followed. It contains a list of requirements. It is managed by someone that you appoint called an executor, and it is supervised by probate court. A will is usually only active for a term of less than 1 year. If you die without a will, the Register of Wills or the court of probate where you live can appoint an executor, who could be someone who knows nothing about your art or any art, and they have to dispose of the property one way or the other. There's a whole lot behind this, and we'll talk more about it later. A lot of people ask me if a trust is a suitable bypass for a will. Individual financial and family circumstances are so incredibly varied that I can't give you a generalized answer about that. Trusts are basically when you set up a trust, you're setting up a company. They can be a nonprofit or a for-profit. It can be set up tomorrow. It can happen after you die. It can happen after your estate clears probate. There are a lot of different structures. The purpose is to put the artwork in a in a package that conveys its legal status, like whether it can be given to people or sold to people, and under what conditions and during what times. So it's just setting up a company to manage the artwork in the long term. When you have a will, again, this is a list of the things that must be done. If you have a list of things that you would like to be done, but you don't feel that you're not willing to exert a great amount of force that they're done exactly correctly. Like, for example, if you want to will a particular painting to a particular person, but you're not sure if you still have that painting, you can put information that is a wish list rather than a must be done list into something called a letter of instruction that can accompany your will. Again, it doesn't have the force of law, but most executors wish to follow the intentions of the decedent. So that's a sort of a workaround, and it can save you a lot of money to not have all the details written in your will if you're having a professional prepare your will. So I said that the executor is someone who supervises the execution of the will. He supervises that your desires expressed in your will, the list of things that must be done, the executor supervises that those things are done. Now, we use the term executor in several ways. A true executor is a person who does this during the probate period until the will is closed by the court. But people also use the term executor to cover what I call a legacy manager, and that is somebody who can handle all the different aspects of your legacy after the probate period. So let's say you have a trust that's active for 10 years. The executive director of your trust, who's also a trustee, maybe is really more of a legacy manager, but they can maybe call the artistic executor. So people just use the term a little funny. In some situations, the same person may serve as the executor and the legacy manager. And in many cases, those jobs are served by family members, which is another reason to know that you'll want to know quite a bit about who's suitable for those responsibilities. In this table, I have summarized some of the art world jobs that legacy managers serve. And in the center column here, I'm writing down some of the traits of that person. It is very common to appoint a lawyer to be a legacy manager or an executor. It is not necessary in either case. The way wills are set up, the courts do not wish to make people pay excess for having them done. So there's a fair amount of support for people who are the executors of the will. There's a fair amount of support to help them get the job done accurately. They do have to submit financial statements and they are legally accountable. But that doesn't mean they have to be an attorney who's compensated at probably the highest rate of any of these other people. So the roles of the legacy manager include managing the work that's on hand, which is usually the job of a registrar or studio manager, a curator who keeps in mind the whole career and all the career issues and professional issues of the artist, their role in art history, the quality of institutions that collect and help promote the person, so on. They may also be the liaison to a gallery, or they may conduct sales on their own. You'll want them to be a marketer. You want them to be able to both take care of the legacy and move it into new dimensions. For example, many of the artists that I've worked with passed away before Instagram, and several of them passed away before the internet. So the policies, procedures, the expectations, even what work is popular may evolve through time. When you create works and you enter art history, you have entered the river of time and it keeps flowing. So you need somebody who's pretty visionary who can figure out how you fit into that to keep the work relevant, to keep the work out there, and to hopefully to find new audiences and new markets as time goes on. You will also want someone who's practical and responsible and organized, who can do things like prepare a financial statement. But again, I think it's really important to note, and I think the main surprise people have is that they do not need to hire an attorney to do these jobs. Now, the other thing that is the most helpful, the will is a must. And I consider a database inventory also a must, but there are many ways of keeping track of your work. In general, these days, I recommend that people use a digital database because it's searchable and it has images integrated. It is almost impossible if you have more than 100 works to keep track of works that are slightly different but look pretty similar, or themes that get repeated from year to year, you know, works look sort of similar or that have similar titles. It's just very important, and it's not that expensive. Identifying works on hand as well as works that are out in other contexts, either with collectors or with institutions, keeping track of those works of art is a huge amount of time for any executor or legacy manager, depending on when it happens. And the more organized you are about that, the better. It's very, very easy, especially when you're a very cerebral person like most artists are. It's very easy to forget that a lot of information is trapped in your head. A digital database, an inventory system, counterintuitive as it may seem, is a fantastic way for you to capture in an organized way vital information about your work. One of my main regrets with Kevin's work is that a lot of the time I don't know the history of a work. People will say, this is such a beautiful suite of work. Is this all one room or is it different rooms? And, you know, when was this, where is this? Is this part of his home or a friend's home? And these are extremely, extremely meaningful pieces of information, and I usually can't answer them. So that's an example of the kind of information that you could be putting in your cold and personal digital database. I mean, it's really an incredibly valuable resource. It'll save you a lot of time, and it'll save your loved ones or your professionals a huge amount of time. It can be intimidating. My specialty is to make them as economical as we can, depending on the processes and the type of work and how your record keeping has been so far. I've seen a huge array of solutions, but I really learned it the hard way dealing with Kevin's work, which was more than 1,000 pieces, many of which I did not have access to and had never seen. You also want to keep supplemental career information. Some of this will fit in the database and some of it won't. It's an extremely useful thing for everyone for you to write your own career history, talk about the bodies of work, what were the influences, what are the locations pictured, what are the materials. You probably already save the materials very carefully because you may be aware of conservators needing to work on your work 50 years into the future. And who knows, artists can be very hyper aware of chemistry and material concerns, or not care, but whatever you do, try to keep pretty good records about it. These days, I think it is essential for artists to preserve audio records and video records of themselves talking about their work. With the demand on websites, with the focus on sites like Instagram, with our intensely visual culture, and with the incredibly personal nature or the incredible interpretations and narratives associated with works of art, if you have audio and video records, that can lead to a lot of marketing possibilities in the future that you may not have thought of, or that you may be shy about now, but may really, really be essential to promoting your work in the future. Any photos of you in the studio or on sites that you're associated with are extremely important as well for collectors, and they're one of the things that people love the most when you put together an exhibition. Another piece of another resource that you have access to as an artist that's very unique is you may have access to you may have papers that you've prepared. This can be stuff like sketchbooks. It can be personal correspondence with other artists, emails. It could be your financial and sales records. It could be your receipts from art supply stores. It could be your holiday cards. There's a huge variety. Your personal papers may be valuable to an institution that you're associated with, for example, your alma mater. Although I've said they're valuable, I think it's really important to emphasize that Very, very, very few artists are able to sell their papers for any amount of money, even a small amount of money. And it is very, it's not a good idea to split them up. If you have the idea, I've seen cases where people are like, 1/5 of my papers should go to my high school, 1/5 of my papers should go to my college, 1/5 of my papers should go to my graduate school. Just think about being a researcher trying to research your work 30 years in the future and whether they're going to want to go to 5 places. It's far, far better for your papers to stay together. Again, don't expect to be able to sell them, and they may need to be culled, but they're incredibly valuable research materials, both for researching your work and your career and your life, as well as for providing pieces of your time, your era, movements you may be associated with. You don't know where the intersections that history is going to appreciate of you are, and you want to create what I call hooks. You want to create as many hooks that people can find to look you up in the future. Your goal is to have somebody write a dissertation about you, or write a catalog about you, or do a show. They're going to want to know the people you associated with, the movements you were associated with, the locations you worked in, because all of those are areas that have institutions that promote and are interested in artwork. Another super big piece of the puzzle is you need a document that explains where all the previous pieces are and how they're put together and how to get to them. These days, most of us have at least half of our assets digital, but we also still tend to have a lot of paper resources. If materials are confidential, if they need to be destroyed, you need to mark that somewhere. You need to have a central document that marks your passwords. There are so many ways to do this. There are workbooks out there on Amazon that you can get that allow you to list all your passwords in a very organized little format. I have one that I work through with my clients that contains categories specific to artists, like, okay, there's all your digital files, but are you sure you haven't told us about the slides that you have too? Because we might need those someday too. So these can be helpful organizing tools, but it's very important that that the material that you leave behind is able to be accessed by the people who really need it. Oops, jumped ahead. Oh, one of my slides got deleted. Oh, here it is. All right. I skipped ahead in my slides. I have a slide, it's all good. I have a slide here. One of Judith's questions is, what are best practices for artists to follow that will enable their legacy to be tracked and cared for appropriately? What are the most important things to do at each stage of your career? They're actually pretty much the same stages, the same steps for all stages of your career. It is really helpful if you can label your artworks. You want to be very careful to mark works that are completed versus works that are in process or were unsatisfactory in some way. Some artists destroy their work, but either way, it's very important for you to make a decision about whether a work is completed. One way an old-fashioned way people did that was they would only sign completed works. You can use any system that works for you, but do try to have a consistent studio practice about it and to be consistent about how you document it. Photography is really important because obviously you can't haul your work all around town or email it to folks. So you want to get the best photography that you can afford to document the work, not just for your database, but also for your website, to send to museums that may be interested in the work and so on. Obviously, the easiest way to do this is to do it shortly after you create the work. I can't tell you how many artists were fortunate enough to sell very, very fine pieces before they had the chance to document them. This is obviously not good for posterity. And my final note and my most controversial note on studio practices is, if you love your wife, don't leave works called untitled. Kevin was fortunate or unfortunate enough to work with his friend Jim Hillary as executors of their dear friend, the artist Carol Sockwell, who passed away unexpectedly and quite young. Carol's work was 100% abstract, frequently not signed, and a lot of it was called untitled. And there were probably 2,000 pieces of it. They didn't even know, in many cases, which side was up. So the clearer you can be about it and the fewer works you have that are called untitled, the easier it will be for folks to keep track of it in the future. And I think that that is the end of the slides that I'm giving you for today. I look forward to your questions. I want to talk a little bit about what I do and how I work with people. You saw earlier a slide of the dozen or so hats that an executor and legacy manager can do, and they really involve really different skill sets. You might be the kind of person who knows the work really well but is super uncomfortable with financial transactions. You may be really comfortable with being organized but not understand anything about art history. So this is a brief description of some of the roles that I play for clients to fill in the gaps, to train people, to revitalize projects, and to help see their role in practical systems such as, the business world, and to fit into museum and institutional roles, as well as for the families to not become enslaved to an artist's legacy. We probably all know examples where people become paralyzed with indecision, where people retain large collections of work, but in the basement, and it never gets out there. It's stunning to me when I started doing it, how much is expected of folks who are often the least prepared, and often dealing with grief or family issues or caregiving. It's a really big job. So, one of my roles is to help alleviate the burden a bit by, intermediating, assisting, taking over temporarily. It works all different ways for different people, and every family is different. Every artist is different. Every financial situation is different, and every piece in an art history book has come from a completely different place. So what I do is highly individualized, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thanks so much. Thanks for coming here, and if you have a little echo on the line or something, we're sorry. This is a really wonderfully educational process, and to mark that, there is a classroom where people at the Schuler School, I think it's called the Schuler School in Baltimore, which used to be the traditional painting. I think that's the name of it. I'll have to look it up, but I want to look it up while you're on here. Anyway, I'm available for questions. Oh, the PowerPoint slides that I just walked through will be sent to everyone who participated in today's call for reference. Do we have any questions? I'm not sure what channel is open.
Let's see. Hello. You hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering about.
Is this Amy?
I'm Helen.
Hi, Helen.
Hi. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this because I'm 64 and I've started thinking about this. And, I also dealt with my dad's estate. He was a dentist, not an artist, but just all the stuff he left very disorganized. I don't want to put my kids through that, especially with all these objects that I have. And I think I'm pretty good on the record keeping and stuff, except that I think I'm going to need to really go over this with my kids and my husband, show them where everything is. But one of the things I'm wondering is that these people they have nothing to do with the art world. They know nothing about this market, even though they've got a lot of good sense. So how do I get them in touch with, sorry about that. How do I get them in touch with people who do, because I'm sure that would be the first question that they would have. I mean, they're working in different, my kids are,
right.
They're businessmen, but they're not in the art business.
And this is a really common situation. We want our kids to differentiate, to individuate, and to develop their own careers and interests. and often to have their own families. So it's a lot, and you want to make it as easy as possible. I don't know your work in particular, but I think the general advice that I would give you is to first, when you prepare your supplemental materials, like materials with your password and how things are organized, you know, sort of a cover document or a supervisory document that explains your systems, include references to all the individuals or organizations who are going to understand the appropriate contexts for your work to be seen. So if there are curators who you've worked with, if there are collectors who appreciate your work, if you have friends who are artists that you've exchanged ideas with, all of those are going to be valuable resources for the person who you make your executor or legacy manager. Okay. If there are writings and articles that help to understand particular bodies of work, that could be helpful to have a bibliography as part of that documentation. And depending on your situation, sometimes people have individuals like that, or like that, let's just say, serve as paid advisors or unpaid board members or trustees, or somehow, if you can find a way to wrap them into a project that supports the work, even for a limited time, that can be really helpful. Does that answer?
Yeah. And how do you pay people? I mean, what is, how do they get paid?
They get paid from money that you leave them. I mean, you have to pay. One of the most common patterns is that people set up foundations and trusts. Thank you so much for the question.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? New format, new challenges.
Robin, it's Danielle Glosser. Can you hear me?
Hi, Danielle. How are you?
Good, good. I have a question.
Yes.
So, as you know, I help a whole range of artists with their business development, from emerging to very established.
Yep.
At what point would you say someone needs to implement all of the items that you mentioned? Only
Tomorrow.
people that are
Tomorrow.
Sorry?
Tomorrow. Monday. Tomorrow's Sunday, so I would say Monday.
So every artist should do that.
I mean, I built an online community for 5,000 widowed people. I know people whose partners died when they were 25. And having dealt with somebody who had a very prolonged illness with all the emotional complexity that brings, I would say that when you're diagnosed with something serious of any sort is not the time to start thinking about it. You need to concentrate on probably other things. I don't think there's ever a bad time to get ready for this. I don't know if this has something to do with the fact that I studied Aikido, which is based on the samurai code, which says live every day as if as if you're going to die. I'm probably not successful at being quite that zestful for life, but there's never a wrong time to do it. It is hard to do, and people stall. I think the current numbers are 50% of Americans over age 62 don't have any will. The other common problem is to have a very outdated will and outdated documentation, outdated life insurance, things like that. I recommend everyone should have a will at every age. Everyone should be documenting their work at every age. And that you should revisit your legal structures like your will, your living medical advance directives. We haven't talked about that at all. It has nothing to do with art. It's the single most important thing you can do is to prepare a medical advance directive. And I suggest people do that, revisit it every 5 years, because your life changes. The common pattern that I hear from lawyers is that somebody makes partner at a law firm and says, I need to do my will. And then they're like, okay, I'm here for you. And then they get married, and they call them 2 years later, they get married and they say, I need to do my will. And the lawyer says, okay, I'm here for you. And then 5 years later, they have their first child. I really need to do my will. So it's really common and easy to stall and put off. But don't. It's such a hassle if somebody dies without a will. So
So it doesn't matter if they're emerging or very established.
I would say as soon as you've sold one work.
Really?
If you've never sold anything, even if you're 80, you can write a letter that says, it may break your heart to do it, but you can write a letter that says there's no sales, there are no financial transactions associated with these works. And therefore, don't anybody hassle my executors about the value of it.
Gotcha.
I would say as soon as you sold one work of art, you're a professional artist, even if you have another career, and you should do this because one of the main practical situations that happens is that people treat things that aren't valuable as if they're very valuable. So families will split over, somebody leaves 100 artworks and they have 2 children, and the children will want to have 50 works each because they think they're each worth $10,000. They've not thought about how can you curate the work when it's split up, da, 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 da. People will have all kinds of arguments about perceived value that don't actually have anything to do with the actual value. So, and that's why I stress emphasizing finished works so much. But being realistic and understanding about what those values are saves a huge amount of heartache, a huge amount of family conflict. And, an important part of this also is talking to both family members and any advisors or friends who are going to be serving in any of these roles before you pass, and letting them know what your expectations are. Your work is not going to be donated to the Uffizi, It's brutal. I mean, it's hard to be an artist. Most artists know how hard it is to be an artist, but a lot of the time their kids and their families do not know how hard it was to be an artist. So I think to do the best job, you should not try to do an unrealistically good job. And that's my advice for people, seeing what I've seen of mortality.
Great, thank you.
Sorry. Judith has a question. Oh, are there any other questions from the people who are viewing virtually? No?
I just wanted to recap a little bit. We have a lot of emerging artists in our Sculptors Group. What would you say is the bottom line? Things just get started and start to build your archive.
Right.
What are the most important things to be doing all the time?
Right. The funny thing about this is that the younger artists that I know generally, since they have grown up in a digital, I'm 53 and I think I'm first generation digital native because I started when I was a freshman in college to use computers for, a lot, not as much as we use them for now, but a lot. But pretty much everyone younger than me uses computers for a huge amount of stuff in their lives. And often they already have a database of some sort running. Even if it's just some sort of subset of their Instagram feed. So I don't worry too much about them documenting the work. I think the same note about marking finished work versus not finished work is necessary. And those folks may need to be prompted to save paper records because digital records may not be organized very well. But things like price lists, announcements for your shows, any criticisms, any reviews, don't just save the web links. Make a permalink or make a printout, make a binder like all the older artists do to be sure that you don't lose important career enhancing information. And the hardest thing of all, probably the most important piece of information people need is to know the names of their collectors. Yeah, so, and if you've worked with a regular commercial gallery, you'll know that galleries can be extremely and rightfully touchy about it. Collectors have a huge array of preferences about their privacy, about what they collect. So you may not receive that information. If your gallery doesn't give you that information, they don't owe it to you. I mean, I hate to say this, but they don't owe it to you. It's not optimal for you, but it is part of it's an intrinsic part of how they conduct business and how they keep trust with their clients. And I've found this out the hard way. But if they do send you that information, make sure you store it in a really important place. Don't be casual about it. Yes?
I've heard from some artists that there's an agreement when it does sell through a gallery.
Again, if any access you have to that information, just treasure it. It's really, really important. It's easy for people in this part of the business to think that your job is to manage the works that you have on hand, but the much larger work is to manage the career.
Robin, could you repeat the question? We didn't quite.
I'm so sorry. The question was, often galleries will, when they, if they provide you with a copy of a sales invoice or any kinds of records, they will often say that the collector will or will not share their personal contact information and sometimes subsequent follow-up information, like if they are willing to loan to a museum show, if they're not willing to. So the gallery may color out what that arrangement is for you. And just if you get that information, treasure it, take good care of it. Likewise, if you're introduced to somebody at a party and they own your work, write it down. Don't just remember it.
Sorry about my
Yeah,
scratching.
it's okay.
Whenever you're ready to wrap up. But I think this is really important.
Which?
That we provide a history of culture, aesthetics, and values.
Oh,
for
of
our work.
course. Yeah. So when you create artwork, you know, you're not just creating objects that have to be tended and stuff that's expensive to store and whatever, and your own point of view. You're contributing to the view of the times that you've lived in, the place you've lived in, the use of the materials you've worked with. You know, you're part of the history of ideas. And hopefully some of us get a chance to enter the flow of that and not just be only in our studio doing that. So I think it's important, and I know it's hard to do this and it's emotional to do this, but you know, I try to keep people encouraged on why it's so valuable and why what you do today is going to really affect how people look at it in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years. It's, you know, you're part of it, and people will want to hear from you. So, and please try to make it easy for the people who you have trusted to care for it into the future. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I have another question. I
Is
watched.
it Helen?
Yeah, it's Helen again.
Hi.
Yeah, I watched a video that, and I don't remember where the link is, but I guess if you go to Photoville, you might be able to find it. There was a panel where they had some women talking about this subject, and they were all people dealing with the legacy of photographers, but you know, I think it applies pretty much to any other artist. One of the women said that her mother was a pretty well-known photographer and had marked the 100 pieces that she thought were her best, and she said that was super helpful to her. And she also said, don't save every single bad photo and discarded thing, because your heirs will thank you. And I'm just wondering, like, what your response.
Are you sure it wasn't me giving that talk?
Yeah, I don't think so.
So I believe that panel that
was it you?
I've given similar. I work with an organization in New York called APAG, American Photography Archives Group.
Yeah, one of the people was definitely.
Yeah, and I've given presentations for their conference 3 years, and so for and photographers have a really unique situation. I mean, my father left over 250,000 negatives. Okay, so it's, I don't know how much you know about photography, but
oh no, I'm a photographer.
You know, it sounds like you know a lot about it, right? So for example, you know, you've got rolls of film and contact sheets with 36 pictures on them of a performance of Nam June Paik in 1962 that people were interested in a certain way in 1963. And the New York Times ordered a print of the best photo on that roll of film and didn't look at any of the other rolls of film. It wasn't that big a deal. Now he's in the art history, right? He's one of the major innovators of the 20th century. Nobody's looked at the other 35 pictures on that roll of film. They're not scanned. You know, it's a huge amount of unseen work for photographers. It's a huge mass of material. It requires extremely specialized care. I know that we think our watercolors are delicate, but a C print or even a black and white negative is extremely sensitive to fluctuations in humidity and temperature, and they can be destroyed like that. I would say I think that's a good approach. That's why I recommend writing a narrative of your work and categorizing the work in your related documentation. You don't just leave an inventory of 1,000 undifferentiated pieces. Say which ones are the top 10 ones. Say which ones the critics liked. Say which ones you thought were great that the critics didn't care about. Say the one that Obama liked when that he smiled at when he walked past it at a reception or something. Any information that you have that can help stratify your work and classify and help people understand the qualities that appeal to different audiences, the better off you will be.
Thank you.
Yeah. But 100 for a photographer is probably pretty reasonable. I think if we were a painter and you got out and you had 100 pieces that you thought were your best, you'd probably be incredibly happy that you had done all of this work, right? Thanks so much for your questions. So I think we're going to wrap up now. I will be available for follow-up with folks. I think you have my contact information. If not, it'll be on the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciated everybody's ability to be here and the huge flexibility and resourcefulness of everyone who helped make the technical components work. We're living in the weirdest times. I don't know. Anyway, here we are, we're together. And I want you to, one thing that I want to share with you that might help steel you for doing some of this hard work or whatever else is going on. When Trump was first elected, I don't get too political, but I was upset about it. And one of the things that really steeled me was to remember this little children's book where there's a mouse. There's a group of mice living in a stone wall through the winter, and some of the mice are really good at collecting grains, and this one mouse just plays the violin or something. And people realize that that's a really important part of living through a cold winter too. You know, you need people who can cook, you need people who can hunt, you need people who can collect grain, but you need somebody to be able to sing when the night gets dark. And I thought about my life and how I've lived my life and how grateful I am that when you're surrounded by artists, you never worry about getting bored. You can get super depressed, right? I may be one of the only people who reads Beckett and finds themselves cheered up, but we're surrounded by content, by juicy, rich material, by appreciation and understanding of so much that is involved in life. And we will be valued, and we need to remember that we're sources of value in terms of creating culture and building culture and listening to people, interpreting things, providing a little color when things are dark. So everyone here is one of those culture creators. And, don't forget that not everybody can do that. We're needed to. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robin.